Most people do not have an income problem. First, they have an operating system problem. I have watched people earn $50,000 and behave like owners in training. I have watched people earn $500,000 and still live like frightened employees renting their future one paycheck at a time. The difference is not intelligence. The difference is not hustle. The difference is not luck. The difference is the code running underneath the money. If your financial operating system is broken, every raise makes you feel bigger for about 3 weeks and poorer for the next 3 years. That is the trap. The world teaches you to stare at income because income is the part that makes noise. It is printed on the offer letter. It is printed on the pay stub. It is the number people throw around at dinner because it sounds impressive. But a loud number is not a strong life. A salary is only raw fuel. What matters is the machine it enters. If the machine is sloppy, emotional, status-hungry, and built around short-term relief, your money does not become freedom. It becomes friction. It becomes payments. It becomes stress. It becomes a lifestyle you have to keep feeding like a furnace that never gets warm. That is why I do not begin with investing. I begin with code. The average person thinks wealth starts when you learn where to invest. I think wealth starts when you stop letting every dollar arrive homeless. The moment a dollar lands in your life, it should know its assignment. If it does not, the world assigns it for you: landlord, car dealer, subscription company, convenience merchant, impulse, ego, boredom. The outside world is full of very smart people who already wrote a script for your money. They are hoping you never write your own. So I am going to give you a cleaner system, not a motivational slogan, not a fantasy about getting rich by next Thursday. A real operating system, 75-10-15. That is not just arithmetic, that is control. If you live inside those rails long enough, your money stops behaving like loose cash and starts behaving like disciplined capital. And disciplined capital changes your posture before it changes your net worth. The first line of code is simple. No more than 75 cents of every dollar gets permission to leave your life for consumption. Not because spending is evil, because unmanaged spending is a silent coup. People hear a spending limit and immediately think punishment. That is because they have been trained to confuse freedom with permission. Real freedom is not the ability to buy everything. Real freedom is the ability to remain standing after life takes a swing at you. If your money leaves faster than your judgment works, you are not free. You are just temporarily entertained. The 75 line is a firewall. It forces a question most people avoid for years. Do you actually value what you are buying, or are you just trying to relieve a feeling? That one question will save you more money than 100 budgeting tricks. I am not interested in turning you into a monk who feels guilty buying coffee. If a $5 coffee makes your morning better, sharpens your focus, improves your mood, and keeps you from wandering through the day like a resentful machine, then perhaps that coffee creates more value than it costs. Fine, buy it. But be honest about why you are buying it. Small purchases are not what usually destroy financial lives. Big emotional purchases do that. The oversized house you barely use. The luxury car whose payment keeps you obedient. The remodel financed by vanity. The television so large it has to be justified to strangers. The vacation you could not afford but booked because you were tired of feeling behind. These are not purchases. These are identity payments. And identity payments are expensive because the emotion fades while the bill stays. That is the real mathematics of consumption. People remember the surge. They forget the drag. A $70,000 car produces maybe a few weeks of novelty, maybe a few months. If you are lucky, then it quietly becomes transportation with a premium attached to your ego. The machine does not care that the emotional honeymoon ended. The machine still drafts your account every month. That is how people end up with strong incomes and weak balance sheets. They did not lose because they were reckless in one dramatic moment. They lost because they normalized premium drag. One nicer payment, one upgraded habit, one more convenience, one more symbol, one more thing to maintain, one more thing to insure, one more thing to repair, one more thing to mentally carry. I call that leakage code. Leakage code is any recurring expense that keeps stealing future options long after the excitement is dead. And the cruel part is that leakage code rarely feels dangerous in the moment. It feels deserved, it feels normal, it feels like what adults do when they finally have some money. That is why it is so effective. Most people do not realize they are not buying objects. They are installing obligations. You need to think like an allocator, not a shopper. When an allocator looks at a purchase, he does not ask, "Can I afford this month?" He asks, "What else must this dollar now refuse to do for me?" That is a far more intelligent question, because every dollar spent is a worker you fired. It can no longer defend you in an emergency. It can no longer buy you time. It can no longer go into an ownership vehicle. It can no longer earn returns. It can no longer lower your dependence on your next paycheck. That is the real cost. The wealthy people I have known are often far less theatrical than people imagine. They are not always trying to look rich. In fact, many of them are almost boring in the moment of spending. I have seen people with real money compare prices on ordinary things, ask for the cheaper option, and split a dinner bill down to the cent. Not because they are stingy, because they understand something the status chaser never learns. Every unnecessary dollar they do not spend remains employable, and employable dollars become loyal servants. That is why the 75 line matters. It trains discipline without demanding perfection. If you spend 60% excellent, then 15% is now extra fuel. Do not celebrate by upgrading your life. Reassign the surplus. The whole point of the rule is that your rising income should first improve your structure, not your image. Now, the second line of code, 10 cents of every dollar, goes to what I call the shock absorber. Other people call it an emergency fund. I think that phrase is too small. It sounds like a side drawer. It sounds optional. It sounds boring. A shock absorber is not boring. A shock absorber is what keeps a bad road from destroying the vehicle. Life does not ask your permission before it gets expensive. Roof car, medical bill, broken appliance, sudden travel, lost job, family crisis. It is not a matter of whether something will break. It is a matter of whether you will be forced to break with it. That is what the shock absorber prevents. I have seen intelligent people make stupid decisions simply because they were cornered by time and cash. They took toxic loans. They sold good assets at bad moments. They panicked into credit card debt. They stayed in bad jobs because they could not survive a gap. They made career decisions not from strategy, but from oxygen loss. That is what a weak cash cushion does. It turns every inconvenience into a referendum on your dignity. And once you are in that state, you stop negotiating, you stop choosing, you start accepting terms. So your 10% is not sleeping money. It is refusal power. If your monthly core expenses are $2,000, do not guess. Do not vibe your way through it. Measure them: rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, transportation, medicine, debt minimums, the dull, unavoidable base of your life. Multiply that number by roughly 5. That is a solid initial target for your shock absorber. Not because 5 months is magical, because it changes your psychology. The person with 1 week of cash hears bad news differently from the person with 5 months of runway. The first person hears a threat. The second person hears a problem. That is a massive difference. A financial cushion does not just protect your wallet. It protects your reasoning. It keeps temporary pain from rewriting your values. It gives you the ability to think one move further than the frightened person next to you. That alone is worth more than the yield. And yes, where you hold that cash matters. Too many people dump their cushion into a lazy traditional account that pays them like a hostage. The bank borrows your discipline cheaply and keeps the spread. That is foolish. Your shock absorber should sit somewhere safe, liquid, and at least somewhat compensated. You want accessibility, not heroics. This is not money for speculation. This is money for stability. But let me make something else very clear. Saving is not the end state. A lot of people hide in saving because saving feels clean. It feels responsible. It feels safe. There is no volatility, no red screen, no difficult choices. They stack cash forever and congratulate themselves for avoiding risk, while inflation quietly eats the purchasing power they worked so hard to preserve. That is not prudence. That is slow surrender. Once your shock absorber is built, the 10% has done its first job. You maintain the cushion. You do not worship it. You do not keep building the same wall while the rest of the house stays unfinished. Beyond the required reserve, your money needs a higher assignment. That brings me to the final line of code. 15 cents of every dollar goes to ownership. This is where most people finally start paying attention. And by then they are usually years late. School teaches you how to earn. Very few institutions teach you how to own. That is why so many hardworking people look prosperous on paper and remain fragile in reality. Their life is entirely dependent on labor. If they stop working, the river stops. They have income, but they do not have assets. They have activity, but they do not have architecture. That is an employee condition. I do not say that to insult you. I say it because clarity is merciful. If all of your money comes from labor, you are not yet running a wealth machine. You are renting your life to one. Real wealth starts when assets begin producing results that are not directly tied to your next hour of effort. That is the ownership engine. And the earlier you understand that distinction, the less time you waste confusing compensation with freedom. A high income can make you comfortable. Assets can make you independent. That is the worker versus owner divide in one sentence. The worker gets paid, then spends. The owner allocates, then compounds. The worker asks for a raise. The owner asks what can multiply without him. The worker improves lifestyle. The owner improves structure. That is why I want your 15% moving into tax-advantaged ownership channels as early and as automatically as possible. If you have access to a Roth IRA, understand what it really is. It is not just a retirement account. It is a tax shelter for your future compounding. You contribute after tax money. Then the growth can escape future taxation if you play by the rules. That is not a detail. That is an enormous structural advantage. Compounding is powerful by itself. Compounding without future tax drag is even better. If you have access to an employer retirement plan with a match, you should treat that match like a flashing sign that says free money is available for disciplined adults. Too many people stroll past it because the paperwork looks dull or the future feels far away. That is absurd. When your employer matches a portion of your contribution, your first return is immediate. No stock-picking genius required. No macro forecast required. You are being paid to install better code. Take it. Do not act sophisticated while ignoring a gift. This is one of the biggest differences between people who talk about money and people who actually build it. Builders are willing to do the boring, obvious thing for a long time. They do not need every move to feel exciting. They need it to work. That is a very Buffett principle. What matters is not how stimulating the system feels this week. What matters is whether it will still be serving you a decade from now. Now, once the money enters those ownership channels, many people freeze again. They open the account and stop there. That is like buying farmland and never planting it. An account is a container not a result. You still need the money invested. And this is where people do tremendous damage to themselves by overcomplicating what could have been simple. They think every path to wealth must feel clever. They chase hot tips, thematic fads, and personality cults. They want the thrill of selection more than the outcome of compounding. That urge is expensive. For most people, broad low-cost index funds do enough. They spread your ownership across many productive businesses. They reduce the damage from being wrong about any single company. They let you participate in the output of an economy rather than gambling your future on your ability to outsmart everybody before breakfast. There is no shame in simple. In finance, simple done consistently beats complicated done emotionally. If you invest $100 a month for a very long time at a reasonable rate of return, the final pile will not merely reflect your contributions. It will reflect time doing heavy labor on your behalf. That is the miracle people admire and the discipline they resist. Everyone wants the snowball. Very few want to spend years packing the first handful of snow, but that is how it works. At first, the machine sounds quiet. Then one year you notice the investment gains are doing real work. Then later you realize the portfolio is adding more than you are. And one day, if you stay in the game long enough, you discover that your labor is no longer the only pillar holding up your life. That is a profound shift in identity, because now your future is not entirely being negotiated in the labor market. It is partly being defended by ownership. Let me go back and tell you why this three-part operating system is so powerful when taken together. 75 creates discipline. 10 creates stability. 15 creates expansion. Spend with a ceiling, save with a purpose, invest with a structure. Most people scramble these steps and then wonder why nothing feels durable. They invest aggressively without a cushion, then sell in panic when life punches them in the mouth. Or they save endlessly without ownership, then wake up a decade later richer in cash and poorer in purchasing power. Or they spend nearly everything, then claim investing is impossible because there is never anything left. There is never anything left because the code was never written. You do not rise into wealth accidentally. You allocate into it. And let me push this further, because the real enemy here is not math. It is psychology. The broken operating system survives because it flatters you while it harms you. Consumption says you deserve this now. Debt says you can handle the future later. Status says other people are watching. Lifestyle creep says you worked hard. Fear says keep everything in cash. Greed says swing harder. Confusion says delay the decision. All of those voices have one thing in common. They keep you reactive. Reactive people are easy to monetize. Strategic people are harder to trap. That is why I care so much about systems. A good system protects you from your weaker moods. You do not need to feel wise every day if the code is already doing some of the thinking for you. When the paycheck arrives, the system should decide before your cravings do. When a raise arrives, the system should decide before your vanity does. When a bonus arrives, the system should decide before your imagination turns it into a shopping list. That is how adults turn money into force. Not with perfect self-control every afternoon, with predetermined allocation. Now let me show you where many people still go wrong even after understanding the rule. They treat the percentages like a slogan instead of a living test. The numbers are not decoration. They are feedback. If you cannot stay under 75, something in the structure must change. Housing too high, car too expensive, food habits sloppy, social spending performative, fixed costs bloated. You do not solve a bloated life with optimism. You solve it with surgery. If you cannot build the 10, your leakage is probably worse than you admit, or your income engine needs help, or both. If you never reach the 15, then the future keeps getting postponed in favor of the present. That is not neutral. That is a decision to remain dependent longer than necessary. The rule is not judging you. It is revealing you. and revelation is useful. Maybe your income is low right now. Fine. The percentages still matter. If you earn $10,000, the system gives each dollar a job. If you earn $1 million, the same system prevents wealth from dissolving into lifestyle theater. Scale changes the amounts. It does not change the logic. That is why good code adapts. The poor can use it to escape fragility. The middle class can use it to stop drifting. The affluent can use it to stop leaking. Everyone can use it to move from random money to directed capital. I also want to say something that people do not like hearing. You do not need to look wealthy while you are building wealth. In fact, that urge is often proof that the machine still owns you. The world rewards displays because displays attract imitation. But the deepest financial progress is often invisible. A fully funded cushion is invisible. An automated contribution is invisible. A rising index fund balance is invisible. Lower fixed costs are invisible. A healthy cash reserve is invisible. Refusal power is invisible. And yet these invisible things create the most visible kind of freedom later. The ability to leave, the ability to wait, the ability to negotiate, the ability to endure, the ability to say no. I have always liked that kind of wealth better than the loud kind. Loud wealth buys applause, quiet wealth buys time. And time is the only asset that cannot be replenished with more effort once it is spent. That is why I want your financial life organized around freedom, not performance. The 75 line keeps the present from eating the future. The 10 line keeps accidents from rewriting your character. The 15 line keeps effort from being your only engine forever. That is a serious life architecture. It is not flashy enough for people who want instant transformation, but it is exactly how serious transformation starts. One assigned dollar, then another. Then another, eventually the pattern becomes identity. Then the identity becomes results. And then people looking at your life from the outside say you got disciplined, or lucky, or financially smart, when what really happened is much less glamorous. You installed better code and refused to keep living under bad code. That is the whole game. Because most people do not drown from one giant financial mistake. They drown from 1,000 unassigned dollars, 1,000 tiny permissions, 1,000 moments where the outside world wrote the next line for them. If you are tired of feeling that your money disappears without building anything solid, stop asking how to feel more motivated. Ask what operating system your life is currently running. Is your paycheck arriving like raw fuel and vanishing into maintenance, display, and relief? Are you one major surprise away from panic? Are you still relying almost entirely on labor while telling yourself you will invest later when life calms down? Life does not calm down first. You impose order first. That is the adult move. That is the strategic move. And that is the part almost nobody wants to hear, because it means the door is already in front of you. You do not need a new year. You do not need a magical salary. You do not need a perfect market. You need a decision, a ceiling on consumption, a real shock absorber, a permanent ownership engine. 75, 10, 15. That is not restrictive code. That is liberation code. You can keep living the other way if you want. You can keep letting every raise get absorbed by a hungrier lifestyle. You can keep calling yourself careful while inflation eats your cash. You can keep postponing ownership until the future becomes an emergency. Plenty of people do exactly that. They stay busy. They stay respectable. They stay trapped. Or you can do something far less glamorous and far more powerful. Write the code, install it, run it. Then watch what happens when your money stops acting like a visitor and starts acting like a workforce. At that point, the final question is not whether the system works. The final question is whether you are ready to stop feeding a life that consumes you and start building one that compounds for you.